So despite these gloomy times and despite waste and wars and maldevelopment that is surrounding us, I invite you to also keep in mind these things that bring hope. And I guess we are nicely having more people coming here, and we are getting ready to start the plenary session. So I invite Bon to continue from here and kick off the plenary session of today. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary. Good morning, everyone. I'm very happy to welcome you again to the second day of the conference and to be convening this plenary session. May I call on the speakers for this morning? So Manuela, Tevo, and Barry. Yeah, I think we can all sit here together already because this should be a plenary. Yeah, welcome to this plenary session. This has been advertised much earlier. As you know, that we have our guest speaker, Manuela Lavinas Picq. I would like to digress from the usual academic introduction of lengthy speeches because I should say that I'm actually starstruck to be on the same stage with these personalities, public personalities. I call them actually celebrities. For those in Finland, of course, you know, Teivo Teivainen. And then just looking through social media, how I found out about Manuela, I think I would just like to say that, yeah, social media, Google are there. You can find many things a lot. I'm just amazed about Manuela, and I'm also wondering, you know, what do I deserve or what do we deserve to be visited by someone like, you know, Manuela Picq? You know, going through all the troubles that we've had. So I would like to pick up from the opening speech that I said yesterday. The title was Hope for Development in the Time of Monsters, Trump and Musk. So it's the same theme of hope that Alina Sajed also ended her speech towards a hopeful future. And this morning, I was so happy that it was coherent with the message of Mary Tianzu. It's about hope. But as I said, I don't want to anymore do the lengthy introductions of the speakers. For now, so in addition to the academic purpose of this session, I would just like to highlight three rationale why we have decided to organize this session. One is familiarity. It's a familiar theme in global development studies. We have had our keynote speakers, events, workshops on the theme of scholarship activism. The second rationale why we would like to have this is maybe this is also my way of communicating with colleagues in Finland. For us here in Finland, to realize that we still have space for this kind of topic, that we still have space which is shrinking to be visited by critical scholars like Ali Kadri, who you heard yesterday, and also to have someone like Manuela. One of the Kadri's messages was, if we don't resist what's going on, we won't exist anymore. Resist to exist. And if the likes of Trump and Musk would be at the helm of the University of Helsinki, the first program that they would abolish is global development studies, yeah, and the social sciences and education. So that democratic space is still here. So we really need to protect and defend it. Now we also feel that in the increasing securitization of the academia, that they would like to securitize our choices of topics to be discussed. And I'm really taking this seriously, coming from the Global South, and I think it's the same message that Manuela will say today, because Manuela has lived a life of resistance. Her body has resisted so much pressure and even physical harm. So this is my appeal to colleagues in Finland. We really have to take this seriously. Otherwise, as Ali Kadri said, it will be like capitalism. Capitalism likes that working people hate each other. Soon enough, if we let this trend go on, we will just be hating each other. Divide and rule. Third reason is, again, going back to the message of hope. When I wrote to Manuela, I was hoping that she could also serve as a moral booster at these challenging times for academic researchers, scholars, as well as activists. We will reflect on that. We would begin this session with a talk from Manuela, and I would like to encourage you to visit and subscribe to the journal Public Humanities, where Manuela is an editor, and she has written a manifesto about the topic. So scholar activism, when our bodies stand by our ideas. And this is the reason I won't make any more lengthy introduction of Manuela. I just encourage you to read that, to get to know more about Manuela's work. Basically juggling and surviving academic scholarship, media, and activism. Sometimes when I had to wait for Manuela's response, she would say to me, Bon, sorry, I was in the highlands. So we now have a person we've always been looking for to have as, someone who works with or in the grassroots, with the communities, with the indigenous. My students in development studies in Uvascular, they always have that demand. Can we have that? Can we invite speakers who really come from the grassroots, from the global south? But it costs a lot. So we are really very fortunate to be visited by Manuela. So again, after Manuela's talk, we will proceed with the interview and comments from Teivo Teivainen. And Teivo is here because he was the recipient of the same award that Manuela won. The Outstanding Activist Scholar Award by the International Political Economy section of the International Studies Association. So Manuela is the most recent recipient of that award. And why Barry Gills is here, who we actually elected as an honorary member of the Finnish Society for Development Research in yesterday's annual meeting. And last year, of course, we organized a roundtable in honor of Barry Gills. And I was able to invite some people who were also awardees of well, it was originally called Outstanding Public Scholar. And I was lucky also to be taught by one of the early awardees of that, Walden Bello. So it was, so I would like it to have a conversation related to the theme. So our theme now is development transitions. So we would say, what transitions have happened in scholarship activism over time? And Barry Gills can provide that kind of perspective because he was a co-founder of that awards committee, as well as he chaired that committee when the likes of Susan George, Walden Ballio, Naomi Klein, Mike Davis, maybe you were chairing. So Barry was the chair of that committee. So this is really a powerhouse, and I'm so yeah, dynamic, indefatigable, and inspiring scholar activist, Manuela, Tavo, and Barry. So we start first with Manuela's presentation.
Your phone for the TikTok. Thank you. Imanaja, such a pleasure to be here. It's my first time in Finland, and such a pleasure to be with you guys in person. So let's get talking about scholar activism a little bit. I was detained in 2015. I was in a protest with my partner. I'm French Brazilian. I've been teaching between Massachusetts and Ecuador. I've been in Ecuador for 20 years now, since 2004. And I married an indigenous water defender, Jaco Perez Guartambel, who's a water defender, lawyer, and politician now, has run for office. And in 2015, we were at a protest in defense of water and against the indefinite re-election of the president, who was a president of the left. And we got beaten by the police. I spent the night at the hospital under heavy police escort. And in the morning, they canceled my visa, declared me an illegal immigrant, and threw me in jail. And after a few days, a lot of mobilization from the international community, I got out of jail. So what happened is that the police came for my partner, for my husband, and I was like, I'm a white body, they're not gonna beat me. They did, but the difference of having a white body being beaten by the police, right, with blue eyes and an academic, is that the camera, bad luck also for the government, there was a camera right there who filmed everything, so after half an hour we were on TV. And it was a national scandal, right? So it's like, this government is beating the professors of the private universities, foreigners. And so it was actually very useful to generate awareness about the violence of the government, the situation of indigenous movements, right? The criminalization of water defenders. And of course, I was no exception. I was maybe one of the few bodies who made it on TV. But there were over 1,000 people who were criminalized, mostly indigenous and social leaders. Union leaders were criminalized, detained, beaten. The tanks had been going into schools, high schools, because students were fighting to change the curriculum. So there had been a lot of repression happening in the country, but because it was a leftist government, right? Playing the whole Julian Assange card back in the day. That was the narrative of Ecuador. It didn't really appear on the media, let's say, in the international media. And this is kind of maybe what propelled me as a scholar activist. Some of my colleagues wrote like that was Manuela's Cátedra Magistral, right? Main class lesson. And when I got out of jail, I stayed like 5 days in jail. When I got out, a lot of my students were outside with tambores, like drums and posters, and had been mobilizing. A lot of my colleagues had been mobilizing, signing petitions, etc. And of course, as an academic, you get that kind of mobilization, right, that an indigenous farmer will not get, right? So I think that's kind of what I want to talk about today. Like, what can we do as academics and why does it matter? And I'll give 5 ideas that I think are important. But before that, I want to give you a little bit of context about Ecuador. Yaku is a water defender, my husband. He's a water defender of Quimsacocha. Quimsacocha is a paramo, a highland ecosystem, about 4,000 meters high. That's kind of a sponge, and it has a lot of water. And below the water, there's gold, right? And about 35 years ago, the government sold into concession those territories to foreign corporations, Canadian, Chinese, they sell it among themselves. And for over 30 years, the community has been resisting the actual materialization of the extraction. So far, so good. So there are camps, but they've been resisting. So at first, they started organizing, right? They were not water defenders. They were just local farmers. They didn't even identify as indigenous, even though if you would go there, you would say, oh, they are indigenous, right? But then they started understanding how it impacts them, mobilizing around water, reclaiming their indigeneity, right, for rights to self-determination, prior consultation. They first blocked the roads, then they created a community radio. I'm going like 30 years, very summarized. Then they started organizing prior consultations. The government said, oh, you cannot do your own little consultation events, right? It's not official, even though there were international observers. It was in 2011, the first one in Ecuador. So they're like, okay, let's do the formal one. And for years, they mobilized, raised signatures, went through legal processes with the national higher levels of the legal system, got it authorized. And in 19 actually, it was the first popular consultation, as they're called in Ecuador, in which people went to the ballot to vote on whether to protect water or give way to the mining. That process inspired many other processes, including one that you may know, which is the Yasuni. Right? In the Yasuni, people went nationally to the ballot to keep oil underground in the Ecuadorian Amazon. It was the first time it happened internationally. It was in 2023. Over 60% of people voted to leave oil underground in the Amazon of Ecuador. So I give this narrative, right? And then we won in courts too. We won in courts over the last 5 years, and the government and the mining corporations keep appealing. It went all the way to the Supreme Court, the Constitutional Court of Ecuador, who reiterated the winning of the communities to be consulted in their own terms in their territories. And I give that example, that short history, to tell you how important this little community that is unknown even in Ecuador is, right? It's a very small community, it's a few hundred people, like 5 to 7 small communities in the highlands, in the foothills of that mountain. They've been fighting just to keep their water system, but in the process, they created precedents in courts, electorally speaking, and they're inspiring the world, because those of you here who have heard about the Yasuni, right, this is a legacy from that territory. So we can do a lot resisting on local, small scale. And yet, and that's where the bad news come in, so we're going to have to find good ways to bring good news and inspiration. Despite all of that, the government keep pushing, right? The government did not respect the constitutional court orders, the provincial court orders did not respect the ballots, and they keep moving in, expanding. They brought all of the machinery. They shut down the radio because, of course, it gives information. They're doing fake fabricated consultations on the back of people. So the illegality of the central government is so powerful that we realize that we played in the terms of the state, right? In all the terms of the state, legislative, judicial, electoral, executive, and still they move forward even though they don't have the right to move forward in their own terms. So what are we going to do, right? And here comes the question of what do we do with our bodies and where do we stand with our bodies, right? Because we write a lot of beautiful things in academia, but how do we uphold them? So that's what I wanted to discuss a little bit. When I jumped on my partner in 2015 at that protest, I didn't think what was going to happen. I didn't measure the effect. I actually thought they would not beat me. They beat me on the face. I lost sight on my eye for a few days. I've lost my job, my life. I had to leave Ecuador for 3 years. I was expelled by the government and my visa was canceled. I didn't realize what was going to happen. And I think a lot of the time, the activism we do is not because we measure its impact. It's because the cost of not doing it is higher in terms of our own self-worth, right? And how we stand in the world and towards ourselves. So the first point I want to make is that activism is anything but glorious, right? And we should not romanticize it. I can choose to do it. I didn't choose to do it actually, but because I'm married to an indigenous person, I live in an indigenous territory, and it's a daily threat. But a lot of people are indigenous, and they can take breaks and come here and not be indigenous, right? And they are indigenous all the time, and they cannot take a vacation from it. And I think most of the people, the region where I come from, activism is very dangerous. If you look at Global Witness estimates, which are very conservative because there are many more rights defenders assassinated in the world. But about 80% of the rights defenders assassinated are assassinated in Latin America, right? And about 40% of them are indigenous. So indigenous peoples are 5% of the world population, but they're over 40% of the rights defenders assassinated. So literally, who is putting their bodies at the front lines, right? And what can we do? Because they're not protecting just their territories. Of course, they're protecting their river, their forest, but we all drink water out of those ecosystems being alive, right? So the inequality in power is very strong. We are not required to do in academia. It's a choice, and it's a choice that costs a lot. So of course there's the personal side. You don't own property. I don't have a house or anything like that. I do have a bulletproof jacket, a cheap one, which is probably useless. But we do not move in the world. I don't have tenure. Right now, actually, I could come here because I'm unemployed, because I said in Ecuador that the president was exporting cocaine with the bananas, and oops, my job got taken away after 20 years at the university. So there are costs, there are concrete costs for health, financially, for well-being. Like one of my dreams is to have an office with a lot of books inside, but I'm like someday, if not the next life. But then the choice we make as scholars comes at a cost even within the institution, in the sense that all that work is not, it's most often not publishable and invisible, right? And it exhausts you emotionally too. It destroys our families, actually, very clearly. Yet, even though it's not required from scholars, I think it's an obligation, it's a moral obligation we have, right? Because scholars have a lot of power anywhere in the world, even in Latin America, with the difficulties we have being scholars there. We have authority, we have power, and we have to do something with that authority and power that comes, right? And of course, there are small levels of activism, and there's not one way of doing activism. From the curriculum to the research we do, to the way we publish, to speaking in the media, right? There are many ways in which we transmit that to younger generations. But I think there is also a commitment we ought to have and stand up to the communities we work with and that we inhabit, that we drink water from, right? I know firsthand that we cannot, that we pay a price. Look, so for instance, in 2015, when I was expelled, my partner and I, husband, we decided to claim our indigenous marriage. We're married in the community. And we thought, okay, if they recognize our indigenous marriage, then we can have a family visa and then I can come back to Ecuador. It's in the law. But of course, the government's like, oh, that's a folkloric marriage. We're not going to recognize it. Yaku, being a lawyer, he started going to courts locally, nationally. He went all the way to the UN. We did all the work alone, just the two of us. And the UN in 2022 ordered the government of Ecuador to recognize our indigenous marriage, to inscribe indigenous marriage as a new form of legislation, and to train public servants in marrying indigenous communities. And it's a really important precedent, not only for us, because we did it for very selfish purposes, but then the result is that it relocates the sovereignty of the state to the community in terms of defining the civil status of people, right? And in a way, it's even more revolutionary than same-sex marriage, because it takes away that authority from the state and give it to the communities. So there are many things like that. That's absolutely invisible in my academic career, right? I can talk to you about it, but it's not, I'm not going to be evaluated, ranked, or hired because of that. And yet we do it because it shapes the world around us, right? We defend the waters of Quimsacocha, we fight for indigenous marriage. Everybody's like, I'll just get the normal marriage and move on. Yeah, como que vámonos. So we're like, well, first they're not going to recognize our normal marriage, right? Because clearly the state expelled me and doesn't want me in the country. But second, it's an opportunity to do something greater than ourselves. And you don't know, I never thought it was going to happen. Yaku was like, oh, I have faced with the CERD. It was the Committee on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination at the UN who passed it. My case of beating in 2015 is at the Inter-American Court for Human Rights. It's been in there since 2015. They accepted the case. Apparently, they want to set a precedent for the rights of migrants to participate in political protests. Someday, it may take another 10 years, but someday it's going to set a precedent. It may, right? So it's important, those things we do. And I wanted to just give 5 thoughts. Of course, we can unpack it after in the conversation on how and why we do these things. From my own experience, I'm sure there are many more ways to look at it. So the first reason and how to do scholar activism, I think, is to share the load, to share the burden. It's always the same people who are on the front lines, and their bodies carry so much. In my experience, it's indigenous rural women in Latin America in general, right? They carry the burden, they're the ones beaten, they're always at the front lines with the police, they're carrying their families, they're carrying their communities, they're carrying the struggle, right? It's unpaid labor, unremunerated, invisible, and it destroys their health. So whenever we can stand by them, especially a white academic body, the difference is tremendous. And I think, of course, for that to happen, we need to redefine the rules of what is scholarly work. And if we keep being rated only on publications, it's going to be very hard as a collective to get academics to put their bodies out there. So reframing the rules of the world to value public engagement is going to be crucial, and that we have to do it here among ourselves. The second one is to use our body as a shield, right? Everybody is a territory. It has class, it has race, it has privilege, it has a language, it has passports. So when you put your body out there, you're not just you individually, you're representing a nation. There is a consulate and then an embassy behind you, right? There are institutions behind you. There are humans behind you who are going to stand up for you. When I was detained in 2015, I go back to that case. There are others, but I think it just encapsulates a lot of the conversation. The Brazilian government immediately came that night to the hospital, right? So it wasn't just Manuela. It was the Brazilian government who had a citizen, and the Brazilian government was negotiating my safety and was telling the Ecuadorian government, hasta aquí no más, right? Let's stop now. And there were two leftist governments, right? It was Dilma Rousseff back in the day and Rafael Correa. So it becomes an international affair. And of course, my university got involved, and it's the most expensive private university in the country, right? And it's a white body, so all the racist people in Ecuador were like, oh my God, right? Oh, let's save her. So you activate a lot of boxes, right? And you shift the geology of the resistance that is traditionally rural indigenous. So using your body as a shield, I think, is key. What I do nowadays a lot is going to court, going to protests, of course. The last protest was when I told you I was in the Highlands, was in January. They militarized the community, and both Yaku and I went, right? And I was there with the women dressing like them with their traditional local outfits, and we were facing the military together. Of course, I had my TikTok account prendido, and I was transmitting live. So, within 3 hours, the governor of the province is like, oh, the military is there. And then Quito is talking about it. The media comes. So it changes the equation. Nobody got detained. Nobody got beaten. And they moved out by 2 p.m. Not just because of my body, but it helps, right? It accelerates the process. Going to court, same thing. The third point is constellations, that we never use our body as a shield alone. We use our body as a shield with many other people, right? If I get detained next week when I go back home and there's a petition, you're all going to sign the petition, hopefully. Right? Oh, yeah, we met her. We're going to sign the petition for her, spread the word, maybe put it in your social media, share with your families. But institutions, friends, right, they activate with us. And that's really important. I'll give you one example from that side. In Spanish, we say soy porque somos, right? When I was detained, I was sent to a jail that was a jail for immigrants. Except the Constitution said El País de la Ciudadanía Universal. It was the country of universal citizenship because, anti-imperialism. But in hiding, like the anti-imperialist country government had created a jail for migrants that they didn't want. And of course, Haitians, Venezuelans, and Colombians, and me. So once I was in there, the human rights lawyers who were my friends, right, who were colleagues from the university, started thinking, wait a second, that jail doesn't exist on paper, right? So they started looking and mobilizing, trying to get people out. The people in the jail were like, oh, we have a white person in here, an academic. The media is outside the jail every day. Wait a second. I don't know how, but the floor from the man, which was above, they sent a letter handwritten to me. Apparently, one of them was going out with one of the women who was in my room. And she passed it on to me. When my lawyer came in, I gave it to him. He took it to the media. The next day, it was published in the media with their names and the accusations they had. It became a scandal nationally. I'm going to shorten the story, but long story short, I got out. They all got out. The jail got shut down. Because of the constellation of work between me, the journalists, the human rights lawyers, immigration lawyers, it got shut down. That jail doesn't exist anymore. So constellations are powerful, and oftentimes they're intergenerational. If you think about the Wanganui River in New Zealand, right, it was 160 years of struggle. So we have to, I think Indigenous people know that very well, but even non-Indigenous spaces, we have to be aware that the resistance is longer than ourselves and that we have to transfer it intergenerationally. The knowledge, the inspiration, the hope, or at least the indignation has to be transferred intergenerationally. The fourth point I want to make is the idea of emotion as power. Emotion is very forbidden in academia, especially in social science. We have to have the central, the neutral point of view, that point of view from nowhere, God. And it very much fosters a disembodied knowledge. right? You know, knowledge is out there, it's not part of a body, but knowledge always comes through a body, and knowledge is attached to emotions. In my case, it was very obvious, the emotions, because it was my husband being beaten, so I jumped instinctively over him. And because we've been together for 10 years now, we've been fighting together, and it's very natural. So but any relation doesn't need to be a love conjugal relation, right? Any relation will trigger us, will mobilize us. And I think the far right in the US or in Europe has understood that and is mobilizing emotions. How can we mobilize emotions in academia? It's a great trigger for political action, right? And we have to think about it more to be able to use it consciously. And the last point I want to make is this idea of activism as embodied knowledge. Right? We do know first through our bodies, then we transform these ideas into concept, or this physical knowing, we transform it into an idea and we make sense of it into a concept. We learn from standing in the world, we learn from being in public spaces with people who are different from us. We learn in ways that are unknowable differently. Like to know in theory and to know in practice is incommensurably different. For all the reasons that I mentioned, but also because we can do better scholarship. So even if you don't want to do it out of love, sharing the burden, constellation, just do it out of selfish desire to learn more and better. Right? Scholar activism is a place not only to activate knowledge, but to activate the imagination of what is possible. Because there are things you can feel but cannot explain, or it takes us a long time to explain after. So in closing, I think I just want to reiterate that we do that for ourselves, not for institutions, not for tenure, not for public consumption, let's put it that way. And we grow into scholar activists once we realize our responsibility towards each other, right? Beyond the immediate each other. And Sonia Sanchez has a poem where she says, we grow up because as of yet there is no other place to go. So I would say we grew up into scholar activists because as of yet there is no other place to go. And given the current state of affairs in the world, and apparently the far right is very present here too, there's a far right Nazi salute style right-wing party even in Mexico that was inaugurated last week. Right? It's happening everywhere. So either academia grows into scholar activism, or it will perish with the rest of society from these extreme movements. So now I'm going to just open for conversation.
Yeah, thank you very much. That was very inspiring. Admittedly, 30 minutes before coming yesterday to have the annual meeting, I had a conversation with Manuela whether I would still accept acting as the chair of the society for the third term. And we talk about family and health. Those are the reason why I had to mention that. Um, and that made me also, we had some conversation about it, and thank you for the reminding. And then she said the first reminder for all of us is about sharing the load. And now I would like to share the load with Tavo and Barry. I would just like it to be a free flowing conversation, so we only have like 35 minutes to go. I think that those might be more.
So you want to go ahead? Yeah, why not? Thank you, Manuela. You're an exemplar, just as we hoped, and just as for this moment that we're in. Can you hear me? Okay, I was asked to do this, so to say something about why we created this award that they've both received, along with many others. It was in order to try to change the atmosphere in academia, in order to empower those who empower others, and empower us to defend those who defend others, who defend us. To bring, at that time, it's so difficult in academia to change the way academia is practiced by those who wish to practice it in a rather radical, engaged way with the world and with the struggles in the world that truly matter for all of us, for all the values that we hold most precious, and for our future. And hope is generated by action. Hope without action is not very powerful. And that collective action is the most important of all. So in academia, it is really fierce. And the competition is intense, and the pressure is intense, and it is unrelenting. And young scholars need inspiration. They need strengthening. They need support. They need to know that they can do this. So that is why when Robin Broad came to me and said, "Barry, do you think we should create this award?" I said, yes, because you act strategically and intervene in a very conservative and in many ways repressive academic, institutional, professionalized organization, and you want to make a change in it. You want to be able to create more recognition for those who deserve the recognition, and because they've been recognized, they will strengthen and inspire the others, the younger ones who want to emulate them and say, yes, it can be done, I will do this. They have done it, I can do it, I will do it. And when you do it, it takes very great courage. You have to be willing to sacrifice, as Manuela has sacrificed. We wanted to give honor and respect to those who merit honor and respect, because that is so important for us to do as a community. Who do we honor? Why do we honor them? We honor them for this, that they have resisted the temptation to be a careerist. They have given themselves over to help everyone else and many others, and they have stood with their work, engaged and accompanied those who risk everything. And those are the ones we want to honor the most, to show to everyone that this is how you practice academia. This is what we do. We can do this. You do this, and we will honor you too, and you will honor yourself and others. And right now in this world, this is more important than ever. What are we as academics? We are human beings. And the world is facing a cataclysm. And all these forces are just growing more conflict-oriented, more intense. And as you stand forward, you will very likely face repression. And through all those experiences, you also learn. Albert Camus said in The Rebel, "I rebel, therefore we exist." Now is the time to rebel. We say resist. I say now rebel. And to do this, to be an activist scholar, is to rebel within academia. There are many sanctions against it, as Manuela mentioned, and those are very, very real. So when you enter into it, as she says, don't just have some fuzzy notion about how lovely this is. This is dangerous, and it takes courage. All resistance and rebellion takes courage. So take courage. And we want, why we did this and why it carries on. It's a kind of a tactic. We did it very consciously to change to at least create something within the ISA is meeting now in Chicago, the world's largest social science conference. We did it within that organization in order for them to recognize it, to legitimize it, for them to say, yes, we recognize this. This is legitimate, right? So that is what this is. And she's an exemplar of where we've come and how intense things are getting, how violent things are getting. But that's the way it is. Any of you engaged in any social movement. And if you think about all this talk about hegemony and so on, why was the new international economic order destroyed by the Reagan-Thatcher entente and the Western powers? Because they had designed the world order in order to privilege themselves and exploit everyone else beneath them. We know this, right? But why did the internal critique of why it failed is because there were so many elites with their own interest, and the whole thing was led actually by elites at governmental level, following a developmentalist path of economic growth and capital accumulation. And that will not succeed to liberate anyone. That is not liberation. So where are we now with the BRICS? The more things change. leaders of the groups? What do they want? What are they doing? What do they espouse? Is this a hegemonic transition to an entirely different mentality of the world? No, and it won't be. So the real change will always come from those things in a territory on the ground with your community. Always. So don't underestimate that. Don't belittle that. Celebrate it and do it. Legitimize it. It is the way. It is the only way.
I don't believe in the state will save us. I don't believe that Elon Musk is going to save me. Okay? So that is why we do this. And then I was also asked to ask you, share some reflection or advice to the young scholars who say, I'm not indigenous, so why should I engage with the indigenous movements who are putting their bodies on the line to save us all from destructions? And themselves, and the earth, and life. Why should I? Because, I'm white and I'm from the north, so I shouldn't do this, What do you say to that, Manuela?
They always want more people there, right? It's not their struggle, it's our struggle, it's all of us. Imagine if only blacks can write about blacks, only indigenous can write about indigenous. Imagine if only indigenous people can do scholarship about indigenous people. There is no indigenous scholarship in academia, right? It's a way of perpetuating the exclusion. The problem is writing about it without putting your body out there in the territory and without understanding what's happening, because knowledge comes through the body. So go out there, put your body, learn, write, share the struggles, go to the front lines. Go to the front lines. We need more people. We need people in Latin America. We need to break the divides, trespass the borders, national borders, racial borders, class borders, right? We need to do it actively, consciously, all the time. We need those bridges. Because without those bridges, the communities there are going to be alone, the communities here are alone. And many narratives can thrive. Many racist narratives can thrive if we're not connecting and bridging the communities, right? Those borders are invented borders and they will be disinvented.
Wow. Yes, very impressive. Congratulations. I agree, it was a really good idea to have you here, Manuela. This has been an honor and a pleasure. A couple of questions from what you were talking. One, maybe Barry was talking about this awarding and the academic association. I think I saw somewhere you wrote something about how something as, I don't know, conservative, something as International Studies Association giving this award and Barry highlighting it. I wanted to highlight something. Now we are in global development and Finnish development research association and this context, like the differences between international political economy, where the award comes from, and sort of our background and a little bit related sometimes to world politics, international relations and all that, that tends to be more conservative. And then in the ISA, I remember, it's always, apart from some exceptions, being in these studies, the global development section that seemed a little bit more radical and more, more sort of activist-minded. For example, do you remember we had these debates 10, 15 years ago, something, probably 15 years ago, that there was a CIA booth at the International Studies Association meeting, and then within International Political Economy section, we had some debate about it, and I was actually bringing up this thing, like, look, it makes, because somewhere, it's freedom of expression, and why can't they be here, and all that, and then what kind of harm it might mean to our colleagues if they participate in an event where it's known that there's CIA presence there, and you know what that can mean in certain contexts of activist struggles and many other things, and then the debate was no, they have a right to be there. Whereas in global development research, global development section, they would go to the CIA booth and say, here are tickets, free waterboarding, who wants to come? And taking a much more active stance there. So I was wondering, now that we are in the disciplinary context of development research, global development research, talking about an award that comes from a slightly different disciplinary context, sort of international studies and international political economy, whether you see that difference in academia, or Barry, you also. Then amongst many other things that your intervention made me think about was this, of course, Ecuador as a context, and there's presidential election also going on. And when you were talking about BRICS, and you were about the Ecuador government and of the old government, the Rafael Correa government and all that, like being on the left. And sometimes, how did you see? Because for me, at some moment, I actually started thinking that we knew that Venezuela divided the left in Latin America. You would have the kind of left, the more, what I would call authoritarian left, and then the more indigenous rights-minded or ecologically minded or feminist-minded people would be quite critical of the authoritarian tendencies of the Venezuelan government. And that was a big division in the Latin American left. But then suddenly in Ecuador, which had been not so much in the limelight, but with one election, I forget how many years ago, there came this thing like you had some more grassroots, more feminist, more indigenous, more environmentally minded left. And then you have the other left that had been governing the country for some time. And I felt this actually, and many colleagues in other countries of Latin America were saying, this divides the left in Latin America actually more than Venezuela does. And it was very, because then the other left was accusing the more grassroots left, like, you're siding with the right-wingers because you're not together with us, and all this debate, so it would be wonderful to hear some reflections of yours there. And as you nicely highlighted, I always thought in Ecuador, the way of combining this struggle of, blocking the roads, which was like Pachacuti was doing like a long time ago, and all that, and then the constitutional sort of roles and sort of referendums, and it was, so I felt there in Ecuadorian activism, perhaps earlier than in some other countries, at least than in Peru, where I was living for much of the time when things were going on. The movements were quite more capable, perhaps, or more reflective on combining the sort of direct action mechanisms and then the constitutional referendum and all that. I mean, at least in Peru, many movements were learning from the Ecuadorians on how to combine them, all the sexual diversity things. Once we broke in Peru, somebody to speak from Ecuador, and we had the sort of indigenous flag, so that looks a little bit like the sexual LGBTQ flag, the rainbow flag, and then talking about how in Ecuador, you would have people who would be, let's say, their sexual diversity, privatization of healthcare. Then you will have traditional trade union kind of reasons to go against privatization of healthcare. You would have indigenous people going against privatization of healthcare, and you would have gay, lesbian, queer activists going against privatization of healthcare. And they might not agree on everything, like family, importance of family and all that, in one group and the other. They might have different emphases, but that sort of united them. And in Peru, we didn't have that. So it was very divided. So something the Ecuadorian social movements were at some moment doing that seemed like things were clicking together better than in some other countries. So now there's an election coming up, and there's somebody from more to the left and more to the right and all that. So how does that? What are the movements saying and doing in front of the new election? And perhaps last, the body thing, what you were talking about your body, and it's, I've never done anything as brave and anything like you did. But it reminded me of a long time ago, 1990, I think, I was in El Salvador. And it was a very violent moment, and then there was a demonstration, and they tell me, you want to march in front. And I was like, Yeah, because and then the thing was, they're never going to shoot a criminal because the U.S. government, the government of El Salvador at that moment was so dependent on U.S.
I got death threats for standing up against the death squads based in Miami when I was a young man because of El Salvador, because I was supporting the revolution in El Salvador. And I had to go into hiding.
Yeah. So and then the question, because they could never shoot a U.S. citizen, right? Because that would be in Congress and all that. That was the idea. So that's why it's good. But then it was a little, how do you take out the passport I had? And then the question about whiteness is mounting, having sort of white body and all that. How do you reflect on the passport dimension, the nationality? Like you mentioned your Brazilian background, which and in Ecuador there was Petrobras and all kinds of Brazilian presence. So how much is it whiteness of the body, which is very important as you highlighted, and then what kind of, does it matter if it's US passport carrying whiteness or other passport carrying whiteness? So there's sort of whiteness and nationality nexus there if you have any reflections on that. And also, I would have Celia other questions because your talk was so fascinating.
I think the whiteness and passport is a really interesting one, right? Because the whiteness speaks to society. Like society, we became like the love story, and that helped us a lot. In Ecuador, in the Andes, there is Simón Bolívar and Manuela science. And we became the couple that the state beats and separates. It became like a Romeo and Juliet. And Ecuador is a very racist society. There was slavery in Ecuador of indigenous peoples until 1963 officially, in practice until the 70s. So the Indian leader with the white academic with blue eyes, right, was like, oh, we are a white society after all. We're whiteable, right? We are modernized. So it really fed into the collective unconscious. But the passport talked to the states. And of course, I was on a French visa before. I have double citizenship. And I was on a French visa. And a year before we started being followed, being threatened, the police came to my house and like, they were going to have drugs in my house and detained me. So I went to the French embassy. The French were like, you're a journalist? I used to write for Al Jazeera. That's part of the risks of your job. And they sent me out. And I'm like, okay, I'm going to go to the Brazilian embassy. And they immediately organized a meeting, said they were going to protect me. So then they're like, we need your visa to be on your Brazilian passport to protect you. So I changed visa to the Brazilian passport, and I had their number on and they knew about me, and they knew something would happen in a minute. So when it happened, everybody reacted and we were connected immediately. And the consulate is coming from China, and he told me, don't worry, there are processes, nothing bad is going to happen, I come from China. And the speed with which they jailed me and expelled them was like, what is that? I'm like, see, it's not the left. There's nothing left here. This is authoritarianism. Right? So you use being Brazilian in Ecuador, in a country where Brazil spends a lot of money, investment, infrastructure, was very strategic, much more than being French. France government had no impact in the Andes now. So there's that. And the 2021 election, to go back to your other point, so that's the first time Jakub ran. So Jakub ran for office locally, he was elected to governor. Then he ran for president. And he got over 20% of the votes. On an agenda which was based on decriminalizing abortion, water defense, distribution. Leftist agenda most of the rest, right? But the water and the abortion were not on the agenda of the left because it's taboo in Latin America. Like, who cares about the environment? And religion is too powerful, we cannot go against religion. And I was like, I'm just going to do that agenda because we cannot not go. And we even allied with evangelical groups. Evangelical indigenous groups, they were more indigenous than evangelical somehow. They're like, we'll just ignore the abortion thing. And we ignored the evangelical thing to our strategic alliances in electoral times, right? And it was a very interesting competition, because it was the left against the left. It was the authoritarian traditional left, which claims to be leftist but privatized health, privatized the ports, shut down the unions, like shrunk access to education, to universities. So we didn't consider the left, and all the leftist sectors, the traditional unions in particular, indigenous movements, were in that coalition. So it was a very interesting election. Of course, we passed into the referendum runoff, and we were announced as, the two candidates going into runoff, and after a few hours we were unannounced, and they're like, oh wait, we have to count more. And after 2 weeks of counting the 3% votes, they decided there was a major shift with the 3% votes, and we got taken off from the runoff. Why? Because that new left would have won the traditional left, right? And of course, at the end of the day, the elites, whether it's on the right or on the left, they are allied, right? And they make compromises to support each other. They're allied to an extent, but the groups who own power, who own the country, especially in Latin America, like their landowners, their bank owners, and they will put the presidents, right, or at least tolerate certain presidents that are aligned with them. But it was a key moment in the history because it generated a debate about democracy. If the people from below are not going to be able to access, like, why are you even bothering to make us vote, right? If you do whatever you want with it anyways. And so now we have an election. It was a manipulated, fraudulent election. After 2 years, there was a coup, internal coup. That president, which was a banker, Opus Dei, fell. Another election, there was an assassination a week before the election, very much Kennedy style. I'm going to my comments at that. But with definitely interference into who is able to run, and the assassination is a strategy to change the game and take people out. And now we have another election in which, after all of that, we had a moment of ebullition of democracy and grassroots left territorial organizing. And now we have the authoritarian right and the authoritarian left. 44%, 44%. And this shows that the world, right, is stuck. And it's not that people are voting authoritarian, it's that the options that we're allowed to have, electorally speaking, are very limited because there's a lot of control over which bodies, which parties, which interests can reach the top. And here we are in a small country that's irrelevant, and yet that exports cocaine to the world. 80% of the cocaine of Colombia leads to Ecuador. So, that's one of the strongest world economies we have today. And that manages elections. And we have far right, far left. Which do you want? I think it's a problem way beyond Ecuador, right? And we're all inhabiting that. And it has to do with democracy and our ability to participate in shaping society.
Hello everyone. I think it's time now to open the discussion, and I'll just collect different comments. I think the speakers wouldn't mind if the audience here would just speak. Yes.
Yeah, you're an old baseball player. Yes, first of all, thank you very much. It gives us the hope, especially us who are working with the research in the global and more action-oriented way. Because we know it's often in the universities, what matters is the application, what matters is the money nowadays, but not how interactive we are in society. That is not done. So thank you very much for giving us the call. But my name is Lavinas, and I'm working as a professor of natural resources at the University of Helsinki. But I've been using the work since in quite many years of this business in very different countries, which only is nothing. Once you talk about the white police and the environmental and so on, it's very different in the different parts of the world. I've lived past there since 93 Tasmania, where was my housemate, my extended family, my colleagues who works with me very closely. And you need to understand that in some countries, you can step out, but your colleagues don't. And we need to be very careful. Yes, I very much agree that we should be socially active in those countries. We need to create activist mindset as active researchers. But at the same time, what is really for the scholars here, the young scholars who are here now, you need to understand one thing: do not harm. Do not harm your informants, your closest colleagues. Because it really matters who you are and where you work. I have just mixed in Tanzania with presidential elections. And yes, I could get out there. Our embassy didn't help. The Finnish embassy don't expect that they can help. But then, our partners, they cannot take up. And you need to understand that what you are doing is can respect the life of the people who you are interviewing, who you closely work. Manuela, I'm very integrated with your work. I mean, the place where you work is completely different context. I'm very proud of you appreciate your life. But I cannot expect that from my East African colleagues because nobody helps them in those situations. I have also worked in Russia with my research team, and where this current global era started, yes, us, we were kicked out. We are not even allowed to keep contact with our Russian colleagues. Some of them, they are here in Finland now, but they are never going to get back to where their parents are, where their workers are. Some of them, they don't even know what happened to them. So same time when we are active and activist-oriented with mindsets in our research, we also need to understand that how we are listening to others who are below struggling. I very much respect Valerie and Taylor your work as well, where you work and where you have inspired others who are as well. At the same time, we also need to teach our students that what they are able to do and how we can help them, but not risk them, for example, who are coming from this country and involve ourselves.
Anya?
Yes. Thank you very much, Manuela. It's very touching.
Please speak to the mic.
Thank you for sharing your experiences. It was very touching. I have another kind of question. Could you please share us the most recent matters that are happening with Ecuadorians initiative? I think you are the best person to give us most recent information about struggling against oil industries and so on. So it would be really nice to hear some of what you know about it.
I think what initiative? Yasuni.
Yeah. Dennis, would you like to go? Yeah, got you.
My name is Daniel Rescatai. I've lived in Guatemala for 30 years in Latin America, but also Kenya and Asia. I would like to point three things. First, thank you to tell the first things. Please go to the field because it changes as much as we do. We do a project and it's really emotional, it's an iterative mistake that social sciences is that we want to do objective. You think that we linked as a scientific project from, but in reality, is really us that learn through. Then thank you. And come maybe to the second, because I understand your problem. Is second thing is know the characteristic that people can go and be like you. I notice this: focus, goal-oriented, resilient, adventurous, ignition, work from indignation, emotional, but also patient and spontaneous. For me, all of these characteristics, specific type of people, not necessarily all academics, specific type of people, that is the ADHD group. ADHD group is type of people that do things because they have to do it, not because of the career. Comes there, I'd like to know their comments about the characteristic of people, because comes the third thing, the risk entitled. And I'm impressed by what you do, because the risks are huge. You lost your career. I don't know how many, if you really have a family, children, all of this, it's huge. People don't notice, but it's really huge. Therefore, we don't do that for the future. We do that because we have to do that today. And therefore, one way maybe to mitigate that, because people have life, career, and also maybe another way would be, a third way would be to act as a mediator. What do you think about that? Where we don't necessarily go in the front line, but we let basically the process. And as we are both from the north and knowing the local reality in the south, we can just simply translate the issues and facilitate a process. Therefore, we are much less exposed. We also can continue academic research, which should be more about objective and at the same time facilitate, and we are therefore more in the shadow. Thank you.
Maybe here, it's closer. Yes.
Yeah, thank you so much, Manuela, for very nice inspirational presentation. Looking at your title, which says, when our bodies stands for our ideas, and reflecting to your story with the white bodies, it keeps on ringing on my mind. Like when we talk about our bodies, basically, our bodies tells different stories when we contextualize with racism. So, and the very point of it is that sometimes our bodies can limit our agency and our ideas cannot be heard. So, from your case, do you think if somebody was Black, could it be the same case? Having the sort of white bodies, green eyes, like the same person with the same ideas, but was Black. How could the situation be in your case? Thank you.
Yeah, maybe I just saw your hand, but quick touch.
Just one question. Sometimes there exist some tensions between the different spheres of our lives. Say, for example, your work as a scholar and your work in other professional contexts. So how do you reconcile those tensions and keep your integrity? Thank you.
Last. Okay, Violetta. Ready? Are you ready?
Yeah, it's really hard. Thank you. It's a little bit in this kind of questions of how to balance this question of exactly the presence of your white body and not overshadow the presence of other bodies in terms of centralizing what is the fight and so on. Because sometimes it seems to me that as a scholar, you rightly said, you get attention and you get like the kind of lights, which is great for for instance, for a struggle or a social movement, but how to balance this question and not to become exactly a celebrity and then just disappear about overshadow what it is behind. And this is kind of my question.
I think, are we going back to Manuela now? Because we should run right after this. Okay. Yeah, maybe Manuela.
So on the last question, it's very easy. I mean, you know, everybody wants to be here, but nobody wants to be beaten by the police, let's be honest, right? And thrown in jail. So there is no problem of overshadowing others when you're facing the police lines, right? You actually use your privilege. And so it's about using the privilege to protect others, right? To empower others, to shield others. What the faculty were doing now with the Gaza protests in the US, faculty going to campuses to shield their students, right? So it's different to use your white body to gain the attention / shield others. So what do you do with your privilege? And so to go to Judith's point, I should have said it's a female white body, right? Because the fact that we are women, so there are other black bodies that go to the front lines. I'm thinking Cornel West, when there was the Black Lives Matter protest, Cornel West went to the front lines, got detained. Because even though he's also a black body, he has the authority of academia and visibility. So he used that. In the communities, indigenous women, they are racialized too, but they're women, and the police beats later women than men. So always, any indigenous protest, you're going to see women at the front, often with their babies on their back, because that protects the protest, right? And the men are behind. Not, of course, they're strong too, but it's also because they know that it gives a leeway. The police will beat later and less the women than the men, and detain later. So it's a strategy of using privilege. If it's a patriarchal society, we use gender. A racist society, we use race. A classist society, we use class. So what privileges your body has from nationality, right? What borders are crossing your body, and can you use in a specific context? And it varies from context to context a lot. To the forms of activism, I agree, we don't all need to be at the front lines, and some people are like, apparently here, we like to be at the front lines, I want to be, and they're like, oh, come to the revolution, right, rebel! But not everybody's like that, and some people are going to be fine behind the lines, and you can still, but I do think it's important to use your body. And you can go to court, like I do that a lot. Going to court, you write an amicus curiae, right, with the letterhead of a university defending, you know, indigenous struggles, feminist struggles, union struggles. And that is not huge, it's not super visible. It's quiet work, you do writing, sometimes you go to court physically or just through Zoom nowadays. But just having an academic body standing by the oppressed in a courtroom will do a major difference, and that's not taking risks. I mean, you always take risks, right? Because it may become politicized, but it's a very small risk compared to going to a police protest. But there are definitely many ways of doing activism, and I don't want to say that my ways are the ways, it's just my experience. And I reiterate, I didn't choose to do that, life threw me in it, and I jumped. But we all have different life experiences, path, context, and it's about reading the situation and acting where we are. And I guess
Yeah, just adding that you have a lot of maneuverability as an academic, and so you, as she said, you choose. And yeah, you don't have to go out and join the barricades. You don't have to, that's a choice. And also it's a situation which you may be drawn into by engagement with a movement that just leads you there, that you never thought you would arrive there, but you might. But you might not. Or you might choose not and withdraw. It's always up to you. But don't underestimate what you can do as an academic. As you were saying, kind of like mediator or facilitator or creator
support of spaces, and that there's a lot of possibilities that where you can have a lot of real effect, and you're doing it collectively with others, but maybe you're not even visible, right? The thankless tasks behind the scenes that in academia that they really matter, And okay, so I just endorsing that same view there. That's a very valid way that you can choose.
Looks like Bonnie's telling us to close down this session soon, so I think let's just suggest we close to Manuela.
I want to thank those who created this award and who create spaces for public action in academia, right, who support it actively, visibly, because it helps a lot in the global south to have these awards, to have these conversations, to have allies up here. So thank you.
Yeah, so we need to rush to our working groups. Apologies to those following online. Something happened with the camera when we moved the monitor. That's why we were.
Thank you so much for that session. That was wonderful. I imagine that you guys also like thank you. So there. Maybe you're also in the bubble there, scholar-activism. Even in this small thing, it's not very well received. Yes,